Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, Bank of America was ordered to pay more than $100 million to customers for double charging accounts with insufficient funds, denying reward payments to credit card holders, and using personal data to open accounts without a client's knowledge. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau said that they opened many fraudulent accounts, and we're going to discuss that this morning. Also, an emergency public safety bill passed in Washington, D.C., as officials say crime rates have soared. The guy who's been on that story from day one is going to join us this morning, Sam P.K. Collins. And also, we know that the divorce rate in America is high, more than 50% by some estimates. But now there's another type of divorce, and it's called sleep divorce. We're going to tell you about that all with Sam P.K. Collins of the Washington Informer. Good morning, Sam.
Peace and blessings, Stacy. How are you?
Good. Always good to see Sam. You are the man, Sam.
I'm only following you, man.
Well,
Yeah,
first, a
thanks.
couple quick things, Sam, before we jump into our topics this morning. Greer was just alerting us to Maury County WKOM radio station owner Del Kennedy referred in a broadcast to White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre as "quote unquote" buckwheat in a racist disinformation-filled rant as he peddled lies about the Biden administration. Let's take a listen.
Like that, where if a child wants gender changing surgery and the parents won't consent, the child can be removed from the home as abused and neglected, placed in foster care, and be given the gender changing procedures.
Is there any question as to why people are leaving that state in droves? It's insanity.
Well, is there any question why, we were talking last week that people, it seems like common sense to me, but folks around the country, and it's amazing, the president Biden has come, both he and buckwheat Jean-Pierre have come out and in favor of a national law allowing minors without the consent of their parents to have gender changing procedures. Living of the public are two entirely different things. And second of all, it is a compliment because the character Buckwheat, if you go back and look at the old Little Rascals movies, is an intelligent.
Apparently, you calling her buckwheat just really set these white folks off.
There we go.
So,
Buckwheat. Actually, that is a compliment to Kareem Jean-Pierre.
How do you feel that's a compliment, Del? That's like Angie Mama.
No,
that's a compliment too, huh?
It's a compliment because
they look.
If you actually,
they're talking about the. Yeah.
If you actually go watch the Little Rascals or the Spanky and Our Gang, is that all the same thing?
It's Little Rascals, yeah.
Little Rascals. If
Yeah,
you
but
go,
how would you like people to call people in your family different names? That's the whole
all
point,
right.
man.
All right,
Be real about it. Don't be living in a alternate universe.
Well, my private family versus a public person who avails himself for a living of the public are two entirely different things.
So it's okay because she's a public figure to refer to her as buckwheat. First of all, she looks nothing like buckwheat, but I mean that itself is beside the point, Sam.
It's the same playbook that we've seen since the Obama administration, where right-wing so-called independent media has gone out and lashed out at Black figures, particularly Black female figures, and called them with all sorts of types of names and made comparisons, as well as spewing disinformation. And it's pretty much meant to galvanize the masses of mad white people, white people who are mad at a country that's changing, a country where Black people and people of color are gaining positions of power. It's just something that they cannot grasp, pretty much. And we see it manifesting.
Yeah, and I also think back to all of those inept, less qualified press secretaries under the former administration, and realized that, wow, Corinne is a very, very a well-educated, very intelligent, quick-witted Black woman. When you go back to even President Obama, I think, obviously there's criticism of him, but what you can't criticize is how he carried himself and how educated, and he was always the smartest guy in the room. And these are the things that they seem to have a tough time swallowing.
And it's just, once again, we're coming off a couple weeks since the affirmative action Supreme Court case, and this just speaks to oftentimes the level that we as Black people are held to in this country versus our white counterparts and what they are allowed to do, which to me is no surprise, but it just speaks to why, we need to, in a sense, not necessarily combat it, but continue to, in a sense, organize against it and to tackle it, because these are the types of things that distract away from the issues at hand. And I'm not saying ignore it, but we got to educate people, let people know the truth of what's happening, and show people, the true ignorance of these actors.
Yeah. Also this morning, Sam, just to follow up quickly on a story we brought on Monday, a jury in Michigan has ruled that a note handwritten by the late soul singer Aretha Franklin is valid as her will. In 2019, Aretha Franklin's niece found 3 handwritten documents around the singer's home in Detroit. One dated 2014 was found underneath a couch cushion, and 2 of her sons, Keith and Edward Franklin, argued through their lawyers that they wanted the latter note to override a separate will written in 2010. The opposing party was their brother, Ted White II, who said that the 2010 will should stand because it was found under lock and key in Aretha's home. It's good to see this put to bed one way or the other, right?
That's pretty old school, though, as far as the note. That's about as old school and Big Ma as it gets, man. I'm not going to hold you.
Yes. Yes, that's old school and Big Mama, right?
Yeah, that's. It was sort of like Aretha was speaking to us from the other side, just how is it that
the lawyer said?
Yeah.
In court.
Yeah. Gotta love it.
You just hate to see the fighting, especially among family members, the brothers. They fighting each other, It's like, come on, guys. There's a better way to do this,
When that money's in the equation, though, people really get antsy, and then you start seeing, I'm talking from siblings, cousins, mothers, and children, and who knows what happened behind the scenes during their childhood. A lot of that probably manifested in the background during this court battle.
It's true. So the will, the most recent will, the one that the court validated, stipulates that Keith and Aretha Franklin's grandchildren would be entitled to her home in Michigan, and the 2010 will said her sons would need to get a certificate or a degree in business before becoming entitled to her estate. But it does not say that in the 2014 version. Both versions, though, allows her 4 sons to benefit from music royalties and copyrights. Of course, her 4th son, Clarence, lives in an assisted living facility. He wasn't at the trial. But again, like you said, you said it best. When money is at issue, everything is on the table then. It's like, wow.
I mean, I think all in all, it like you said, I'm pretty glad that it was rectified, and this speaks to why it's important that people handle their affairs before they get incapacitated or they transition from the physical, because you don't want the courts or to handle what family's supposed to handle internally, because by the end of the day, if the courts were to handle it without paperwork, my understanding is that the infighting would cause the family to lose a big chunk of those assets in the very end. So it's often better that family members do what Aretha Franklin did, even if it was through those unconventional means, So
And to your point already, they got to pay these lawyers for having to go to court and fight this fight. So you're right. You're 100% right. We talked about this the other day, but thanks for bringing more insight to it, Sam. You remember when Wells Fargo created all those fraudulent accounts a few years back? Big news. Then now Bank of America is joined the fray. Bank of America was ordered yesterday to pay more than $100 million to customers for double charging accounts with insufficient funds. They also was fined for denying reward payments to credit card holders and also using personal data to open accounts without a client's knowledge. This is what the Consumer Financial Protection discovered and announced yesterday. The second largest bank harmed hundreds of thousands of customers over a period of several years and across multiple products, according to the federal agency. In addition to the customer payments, the bank now must pay $150 million in penalties. This is outrageous, to say the least.
The banks run this country without question, and I think it's good that they're being held accountable, but for them to have been able to do that for so long, I think it speaks to what the banks are able to do with impunity to some extent in this country. And I would even call the banks the shadow government of the United States, just because of what they're able to do. And at a time with high interest rates where people are robbing Peter to pay Paul, to pay the rent, pay the mortgage, put food on the table, this is totally unnecessary. And we know that overdraft fees accumulate, $30, $35 at a time adds up pretty quickly when people are trying to make ends meet. And for the banks, particularly Bank of America has had a bad rap for as long as I've had a bank account, and maybe longer than that. And for them to take advantage of common folk, everyday folk, is just egregious. It's egregious. And I think that it's going to take something legislatively at the federal level, even, for this to be rectified. But even at times, I lack confidence that that's going to happen because the banks, once again, have so much power. We've seen it time and time again when it comes to student loan discussions, anything dealing with loans, dealing with banks. The banks have the power in this country. They hold the country up to some extent. So they're not going to let go easily when it comes to their power.
Well, and also what flew under the radar a bit last year, Bank of America was forced to pay $235 million in fines for illegal garnishment and failed disbursement of state unemployment benefits during the COVID-19 pandemic. So they've been getting away with murder.
So how are they allowed to do that? Because, in the same vein, and of course, I'm not excusing people's behavior, the government's still trying to get at people committing PPP fraud. Right. And Bank of America has been allowed to commit similar type of fraud under the radar for so long.
Yeah, exactly. What's going on? And that's a question that has to be asked. What is going on? What's really going on? Because like you said, there are folks getting locked up for PPP fraud. This sounds like it's the ultimate PPP fraud.
Well, oftentimes it's the ultimate fraud. It just depends on who's committing it. That's why they call it white collar crime versus blue collar crime, and as long as you're the person signing the checks, you got the banks, then it's not criminal to an extent. They just call it conducting business, And so once again, we got to see what Congress is going to do, if they're going to do anything, because once again, they're backed by the banks. Big bank takes little bank by the end of the day. And I mean that.
As Power 96 always says, they got the complexion for the protection.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
Man. And he says they get away with it because they control the lobbyists and the lobbyists control the lawmakers. And Daniela Pierre says banks appear to have no problem with extending loans for vehicles, especially used, but put up so many barriers when it comes to small business loans and mortgages. How true is that?
That's part of the game, though. That's part, especially with with the interest rates getting so high once again, and car purchases, I'm glad they mentioned that, because car purchases post-COVID have been very hard to make. The used car market, disgusting. So people are getting pressured into financing vehicles at interest rates at about 6-8% sometimes, and the banks are winning. The
Yeah.
banks are winning. They're just trying to recoup the losses, the so-called losses perhaps of COVID, because they saw the COVID pandemic pushing the United States into a so-called socialist society with people getting $600 and $1,200 checks. They were just they just couldn't wait to recoup their losses, and we're paying for that. I knew that we were going to pay for that when around the pandemic. Once they started giving us things to survive, I knew that we were going to pay for that once everything opened back up.
Pay for it with a lot of interest too.
Of course.
It's too much. Sam, here's a story that you have been on for a long time, always on top of. The alarming rates of crime across the nation's capital have led politicians to pass an emergency public safety bill yesterday. The legislation aims to tackle the rising incidence of crime and restore a sense of security to the community. MPD statistics reveal distressing figures as of Monday, July 10th, with homicides up by 17% year to date compared to last year, while reported robberies have skyrocketed by 52% and motor vehicle thefts surged by a staggering 117%. Sam, so this bill, tell us about this bill.
So the bill is one of three. I would like to focus on the other two briefly.
Yes.
The other two that passed without incident, one was dealing with 911 dispatchers, just holding them more accountable to make sure that calls didn't get dropped, that the Office of Unified Communications maintained staffing levels that made it easier to take calls and dispatch EMT and police. That was the first one. And the second one was dealing with a no chase law that was passed a couple years ago in the aftermath of a police-involved murder where somebody was chased and they crashed into another car. This one was pretty much to make it easier for the local police department to initiate chases in cases that they felt needed it, because MPD felt that the law was too tight, that it was too narrow. So they sort of loosened it a bit with that one. Now, the law that we're speaking about, the bill that we're speaking about, the one that caused a lot of controversy, had a lot of for lack of a better word, treats in it, treats for those who are opposed to crime. And the one that caused the most controversy was the one where defendants who are accused of violent crimes get pre-trial detention, meaning that they are unable to fight their case from home, meaning that in the 100 days or so that they are awaiting trial and they're going through trial, they will sit in DC jail, whether they actually accused of crime or not. That was a tenet of the legislation that caused a lot of controversy, that kept DC council members in on their pre-legislative meeting breakfast over time, and actually got the legislative meeting in the council, the whole meeting started late. So the DC council, after they handled other bills, they went into this bill and the other bills, and they stayed up until about 5:30 or so yesterday, just wrangling everything through. But that bill caused a lot of controversy. To the point where DC council member Janice Lewis George voted against the bill, and her 12 colleagues actually knocked down her amendment. Well, 10 of her colleagues, because she and Vincent Gray of Ward 7, they stood together to eliminate that portion of the bill that would have kept defendants inside DC jail for violent crimes that they are accused of. So that's still a part of it. Of the parts of it, there's a law in it where firing a firearm in the air or just indiscriminately is a felony, where strangulation is a felony. There's a portion in there that speeds up deliberation on sex crimes involving youth. There's another portion in there that it does quite a lot, Stacey. For juveniles now who are accused of crimes involving weapons, they will get detained now. And the DC Council, they met over the weekend to make sure that that was pretty narrow. In fact, just to make sure that, there's a difference between youth getting caught with guns and using guns in the commission of a crime. So youth caught in violent crime, particularly that involving guns, will also be detained. And the law, it's been in response to skyrocketing crime, a lot of concerns. DC Mayor Bowser was very adamant about the DC Council passing this, and we even saw some friction between her and DC Council Chairman Phil Mendelson. Phil Mendelson was pretty mad yesterday. He was livid about the onus being placed on the DC Council. He said that the public has it wrong in terms of who's responsible for deterring crime. The DC Council is not responsible. That's what he said. He said the onus is on the executive branch, particularly the police department and the detectives, to close the cases. So my understanding is that the case closure rate is 35%, meaning that 65% of murders have gone unsolved from last year. So there's a bit of friction between the executive and DC Council Chairman Phil Mendelson when it comes to that. Now, there were 2 amendments that passed yesterday with that legislation, one by DC Council member Robert White that triggers the collection of data involving the trafficking of guns inside the DC area, or inside DC proper. And there's another piece of legislation that DC Councilmember Charles Allen worked on that to an extent triggers some interagency work to track where violence happens and to sort of prevent it, in the sense that that law enforcement uses data to be more proactive about where to target crime prevention efforts and who to target in terms of potential victims and potential perpetrators. Now, DC Councilmember Brooke Pinto, the chair of the committee that introduced the bill, that worked on the bill, she's been very adamant about the DC Council not harping on emergency legislation, not legislating its way necessarily out of crime prevention. But mind you, this emergency bill she felt was very necessary. And she said it herself. She didn't want to see murders surpassing 200 for the 3rd consecutive year. But she has called on her council colleagues to not legislate their way out of crime prevention, but more so to work with the executive and to get their buy-in on most things. So that's what we're looking at, and that's the long and short of it, pretty much, to tell you the truth.
It's so interesting because DC has had problems for a long time. If you recall, many might recall the basketball team, the Washington Wizards. It used to be called the Washington Bullets, but because of the shootings and the violent crime, they were pushed to have the name changed from Bullets to Wizards. And this was in the 90s, in 2023. And they're talking about and you just said something that's astonishing. So 65% of murders go unsolved in the district, or went unsolved in the district last year. That is just unfathomable.
And part of that is, my understanding is that the Office of Forensics, they're undergoing some problems right now. The DC Council budget attempted to rectify that. There's some oversight issues as well. So you got forensics, and then you also have situations where the arresting officers they commit Fourth Amendment violations. So where suspects who are caught in the commission of a crime, who are alleged to commit a crime, the Attorney General or the U.S. Office of the Attorney General, they dropped the case because the arrest was dirty in their eyes. And these are a lot of things that go into consideration when talking about case closures.
It's amazing too. I want to go back to the earlier point you were making about those accused having to stay in the DC jail. There's a movement. There's been a movement to get rid of cash bail and afford people that opportunity to fight their cases from home, as you stated. This seems extremely problematic because, again, it throws out that presumption of innocence.
It definitely does. And it's ironic that this happened about 2 weeks ago. 12 alleged members of a crew known as the Kennedy Street Crew, they were indicted and they were arrested. They're currently sitting in DC jail. A couple of days before this council vote, one of them, through a friend or whoever, took to social media to talk about the conditions in DC jail. lack of water, lack of showers, lack of recreation time, lack of access to laptops that would allow them to confer with their lawyers, taunts by guards who are calling them gang members and other sorts of types of names. So that situation, once again, the irony of it just taking place a couple of days before this vote really drives home the point of the balance that the DC Council, to some critics, did not maintain, in terms of crime prevention. Here you have, of course, people who are very concerned about crime, about drug trafficking, but in the very same vein, those who are accused of crimes, they have not been convicted yet. And they are not allowed in most cases, or they won't be allowed, especially if they are accused of violent crimes, to fight their cases from home. And they might be subjected to the same conditions, even as the DC Council and DC Jail works to improve conditions at that facility.
And Sam, what's the pulse of the community? You always have your finger on it when it comes to this crime bill, when it comes to these things that we're discussing. What is the community saying?
It's very polarizing to an extent. You have a good number of the community who is happy that something like this is happening, and they are frustrated. A lot of them are oftentimes victims, or they know victims of carjackings, of murders, of robberies. They are very, very happy for the most part that this has happened, that the DC Council is taking action. Oftentimes the DC Council does catch the brunt of criticism for its alleged inaction on the issue. In the very same vein, you have some community members who are concerned about us reverting back to the 1990s and the 1980s during an era of mass incarceration and mass arrest. And they're concerned that there's not enough attention on wraparound services, even during yesterday's hearing. And a lot of community members can attest to this. There was concerns about this bill passing just weeks after the DC Council passed a budget that they had to fight the mayor on, in which wraparound services and money for housing and security was not included. So we're fighting crime, but we're not fighting the determinants of crime. We're not giving people the wraparound services and the security that they need so that they're not committing crime. So it's a big conundrum. And one council member who caught the brunt of criticism for what they might consider his 180 was Ward 5 council member Zachary Parker. Zachary Parker, and you're right there, is a walk that he was on in Ward 5 not too long ago with the mayor. He caught criticism for supporting the bill and for supporting the pretrial detainment of adults and juveniles. A lot of people who supported him, we're talking about democratic socialists, we're talking about leftist and progressive activists, Ward 5 residents who stumped for him. They criticized the council member for supporting this bill because they thought that it did not align with the values that he professed to have. And yesterday, he was very adamant about saying that he was only responding to the concerns of residents who have been the victims of crime and who are very adamant about preventing crime. So this debate has caused a lot of friction in the community and on the DC Council.
What's the mayor's what's her approval rating or disapproval rating? What does the community think about the mayor's job performance?
That's a loaded question. The mayor, from what I reckon, DC's getting a bit more expensive. There's a section of the city that is in a state of being the permanent underclass. At the very same time, the mayor and her administration has engineered enough programs and enough jobs in the government and outside of the government for a certain portion of district residents to be satisfied enough with her performance. So it's that case where things are bad, but they are not that bad in the eyes of some people. At the very same time, we have police-involved murders, not murders in some cases because those people have not been convicted yet, but in one or two cases, they were considered murders. We also have police-involved shootings, shootings involving local officials, and local officers and federal officers. We also have, like I said, a budget that she proposed that reflect significant cuts, to SNAP, to emergency rental assistance, to other social services. So the mayor, there has been some dissatisfaction with the level of social services and with the way that housing has gone under her stewardship. At the very same time, people have respected her, the way that she's been adamant about fighting crime. And she has stood on 10 toes in that, to the point where she has called Chairman Mendelson's viewpoints asinine. She has worked very closely with Brooke Pinto to get legislation passed. People are very respectful of her efforts to solve crime, because regardless of how you feel about somebody, when there's a gun pointed to your head or when you're being carjacked, you sort of take on their viewpoints of what they want to do when they appear to be very adamant about preventing crime. And, people are very thirsty right now for the lock 'em up method, love or hate DC Mayor Bowser. And she's been on that wave for quite some time now, just partly out of frustration and just out of a need to show people that DC is very serious about solving crime. And we can't forget about that federal pressure on Congress. She sat before a congressional committee that includes Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert. And I'm telling you, they grilled her, they grilled Mendelson, they grilled Charles Allen. They had the chief financial officer, Glenn Lee, up there. They had a whole lot of actors from the local DC area out there just grilling them. And, the revised criminal code act also went to waste and never made it past congressional review. So right now there's a lot of pressure to appear as though DC is serious about solving crime.
Yeah, and all of this you spelled out there, linking it to these hearings with Congress, underscores perhaps DC's biggest problem, and that is the fact that DC deserves its statehood, and and they can't operate with autonomy like other cities. They have to go through Congress, and that's a problem. That's been a problem,
without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Wow. And you mentioned too, and we not to criticize the mayor, but you mentioned too something that I find interesting: the cuts to social services. That sounds like a more Republican move than a Democrat.
Oh, it's a Reaganomics type move. I'm not, and I've spoken with activists who look at this as a formula that's been played out time and time again. You cut social services, you rev up efforts to get police on the ground, to take away people's civil liberties in court, and then you sort of re-engineer mass incarceration that way. And it's happening little by little, like Councilmember Janice Lewis-George said, because people were very careful yesterday to say time and time again that they did not want to repeat what happened in 1994. But Councilmember Lewis-George pushed back by saying that oftentimes this happens in increments. So you take a little bit here, you take a little bit there, and then eventually people with this wide net being cast are put into the system, and recidivism rates are increased. Because according to the research, when people sit in jail fighting their case, they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, and then they're forced to come home to nothing, and then they get pushed further into the criminal underworld. So, it's Republican to an extent, but DC, unbeknownst to a lot of people, is a very conservative city. DC is there's a conservative undertone in everything that's happening. There's an anti-poverty undertone about what's happening in the city. And that conservative undertone, in part, engineered gentrification. It's the only reason why 12 people were followed for 4 years and a case built up against them, because elected officials and police took to the concerns of the newcomers more so than, people who've been there for decades. And I would say that the newcomers adding on to the concerns of the old timers in that neighborhood. But once the newcomers leveraged their power through the ANC commissions and all of that, MPD took notice and they built a case against a dozen young people and 4 more for whom there are warrants still out.
Wow. Lots and lots going on in the nation's capital. Listen, read Sam Collins in the Washington Informer. Stay up to date. He's filing some great stuff every day. Another paper's weekly, but the website is daily, and Sam is on top of it. So continue to follow Sam P.K. Collins in the Washington Informer. Sam, before we close out this morning, we know that the divorce rate in America continues to rise, but another type of divorce is happening. According to a survey from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the practice of sleeping separately, known as a sleep divorce, is widespread now, and it's supposedly meant to help couples, individuals fall asleep and stay asleep without disruptions such as snoring, stolen covers, or what they call early alarms. More and more people are, listen, you're married, you sleep together. That's what I believe. And so you take the good with the bad. But this pulmonologist, Dr. Seema Khosla, who authored the study, and she's also a spokesperson for the organization, whose acronym is AASM, said getting a good night's sleep is important for both health and happiness. So it's no surprise that some couples choose to sleep apart for their overall well-being. The survey of more than 2,000 adults say that 43% of millennials engage in sleep divorce, followed by 33% of those in Generation X, 28% of those in Z, and 22% of baby boomers. What do you make of all of this, Sam?
I mean, to each their own. I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I'll say this, people need sleep, and I'm not, I got to look at the study some more. I'm just wondering if there are any external factors, so maybe like economic stress, people living under the same roof at a time when property taxes are increasing, and if you're renting where rent is unpredictable, maybe the stress of just working all the time gets to people. Maybe one spouse has a different work schedule than the other, or maybe people are just too broke to divorce and have separate homes. Maybe they're going to work it out separately and make sure they can keep a roof together. Who knows?
Oh man!
Maybe this is
It's probably, when you look at the study, it does break down things like economics and other external factors that you mentioned. But folks are finding it that they're getting better sleep. You remember those old movies where and TV shows, even like I Love Lucy, where they slept in separate beds and things of that nature. Now they're talking about sleeping in separate rooms. And some folks, we know that there are some who snore, some who have sleeping issues, and as you said, so there was a study just last week we reported on that said that the Alzheimer's and Black folks, if they were to get a certain amount of sleep on a regular basis, it could help stave off Alzheimer's.
Oh yeah.
So sleep is extremely vital.
Exactly. That's how you function throughout the day. You can't keep going and going and going. You got to get a good, I say, if not 8, at least 6, especially the older you get. That's a very important piece. And I'm speaking as somebody who at times does not follow my own advice, but the way my body's going, you can't ignore it. My body tells me, listen, it's time to sleep.
Yep.
And and I think that, once again, to each their own. And, if couples have an understanding that in order to maintain the peace, I want to sleep over here and you sleep over there, then so be it. Maybe it's a reflection of just people trying to maintain their autonomy in a relationship to some extent, or
Right.
maybe it's a conflict resolution, strategy, whatever the case is. I really can't. It's a very interesting concept. I really can't speak to that. I thought a lot of people were like cuddlers. I don't know, maybe,
Well, that was and that was another issue. It brought up that there are those who prefer to cuddle and more than even sleep. So I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I need some sleep.
That's how your arm gets hurt.
So we'll see. But some of the factors too, just the fatigue, daytime sleepiness, unrefreshing slumber, persistent headaches upon awakening. Yeah, folks have, COVID has exposed a lot of issues that we didn't necessarily talk about prior to COVID. They were there before COVID, but now it's really brought it to the fore. I mean, some of the things that they mentioned too. You might want to get some sleep, because these things, like we said, these waking up in the middle of the night, the daytime sleepiness, the difficulty concentrating, memory impairment. And here's the other thing. Without sleep, they say, according to this study with medical experts, say you have a diminished libido. There's another reason to get 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah, so they're just compounding the problem.
Yes. So now I guess when you really go into the study, you say, okay, so I see why you're sleeping apart.
Right. Maybe it's a way for them to miss each other, so that when they come back, they get that spark back, maybe.
Yeah, but here's the other thing they tell you too about not what you shouldn't do. We are on our devices all the time, and sleep experts say that 2 hours before you go to sleep, you should not for up to 2 hours you should not be on this. You should not be looking at a device, and the television should be off. A lot of us, me included, like to fall asleep sometimes with the TV on. Nakia is watching. Auntie Nakia is watching. She says, I hate to admit it, I have sleep apnea, so I snore like a grizzly bear. So I am too ashamed to have anyone in bed next to me. Well, hey, that's an issue for some folks for sure. That snoring like a grizzly bear, she said. My. Yeah, I think I'd be like, okay, Nakia, you're on your own. Sam, we appreciate you so much. And listen, like I said, you guys read the Washington Informer, particularly Sam P.K. Collins and what he's doing in the district, bring you everything you need to know about not only this crime bill, but so much other things that are going on in the nation's capital. Thanks so much for all your great work, Sam, and thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Stacy. Always a pleasure.
Thank you all for watching Let It Be Known. We'll be back again tomorrow. We'll see you then.